Okay, hi, welcome. Melanie, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Melanie Randolph. I have a deaf ministry called Hearts and Hands Deaf Ministry here in Norman, Oklahoma. And I just came to talk a little bit about the deaf community and the deaf culture and answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. So I heard a presentation that you gave before, and what really jumped out at me is that you said that was it 5% or less than 5% of faith communities
Mhm.
are able to or have any kind of accommodation to engage the deaf community or any potential deaf members. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, that's astounding to think that in America, 5% or less of the churches have an interpreter or offer any sort of services for the deaf in any way, shape, or form. Even in the Bible Belt here in Oklahoma, it's it's hard to find a church with an interpreter or to find a church where deaf people can go and have a deaf pastor. So I think there's maybe two in Oklahoma. I know of one in Oklahoma City, but that's about it.
Okay. And assuming that also really limits, any kind of like denomination or
Yes,
limits some
every
kind of
every denomination.
sort of
Um,
any kind of spiritual path that person is on has to be very restricted, I guess, by that.
it is. It's very restricted because of the language access, and to add to that, most deaf people are born into a hearing family, where 95% of the deaf people have hearing parents, so they don't have anything like that at home. And of that, the percentage of parents, more than 75% don't learn any sign language at all. So even if their parents take them to a church of their choice, the only thing they get is coloring sheets or something. They have no language access, nobody to communicate with them, nobody to tell them about Jesus or any of the Bible stories that I grew up hearing all the time. They don't hear that.
Okay, so backing up a little bit, sort of how do you define the deaf community and what's the appropriate language around that as well? I've
Oh,
heard of hearing or
yes, yes, that's a great thing. Deafness is defined as someone who is born deaf or becomes deaf, normally as a child due to an illness or something genetic. Sometimes it'll happen to an adult because of something, either loud noises or something. Usually, if that happens, then that person doesn't learn sign language because they've already gone through adulthood. Um, the appropriate terms to use would be deaf or hard of hearing. And most people will tell you, I am deaf or I am hard of hearing. So if they specify one way or the other, then that's what they prefer. Hearing impaired is a medical term. And in my many years of being around deaf people, I don't know of any one deaf person that says, I am hearing impaired. And the reason is that that focuses more on the negative aspect of their deafness, something that they can't do rather than what they can do. And so they prefer deaf or hard of hearing.
okay, cool. And so how did you sort of get into, I think you have a degree in deaf education.
I do.
And then how did you sort of get into being an interpreter? Do you do that elsewhere? Or is it just in faith communities?
Um, right now, I don't do it for my job. My degree is in deaf education, so I was a deaf education teacher in Texas for several years. So I taught in a classroom that had children whose primary or only disability, medically speaking, would be their deafness. So I taught them reading, writing, spelling, math, history, the whole shebang in a deaf education setting. My minor is in interpreting. So I stepped out of the classroom when my husband and I started having kids, but remained active in the deaf community in Wichita Falls, where we are from. And our church there took several mission trips to Jamaica, of all places. Um, yes. And so I have several friends that are down there. I'm waiting to hear back from some of them.
Hmm.
They are right in the eye of the storm. So they
Okay.
are getting it as we speak. So I taught Bible study there, and then I taught the mission team members that went with us. I taught them how to sign a song. So at the end of our trip, we would all sign a song like "At the Cross" by Chris Tomlin, I think, or "Oceans." We did a different song each year, and then we moved here 11 years ago now, and so I taught in a private school setting, not a deaf ed setting, but I started putting my feelers out to the deaf community and attending coffee chats and things like that. And then in 2024, Deaf Missions, which is an international organization, um, completed the Jesus movie. It's done completely in sign language, in American Sign Language, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. Deaf actors, deaf extras, deaf producers, deaf people made the sets and everything. So they released that movie at a conference in Dallas back in April of 2024. And so I attended that conference. And then that summer, they released it for downloading or streaming, actually. And so my church here in Norman sponsored the event, and we invited everyone in Oklahoma to come. And people drove for up to 2 hours to come to Norman to watch the movie, to come see it, because it's done completely in sign language, and it focuses in on Jesus's ministry on earth. So it picks up, the last 3 years of his life. And it's like I said, it's done completely in sign language. So it is in their heart language. It is captioned. So if you don't know sign language, you can still know what's going on. There are sound effects. So you can hear the waves rolling and the rooster crowing, things like that.
Hmm.
From there, I launched with their curriculum a Bible study that I have here in my home. We meet 1 or 2 times a month, depending on availability of everybody. So we just kind of focus in on different aspects of Jesus's life, and it's that also is in sign language. So it's in their heart language, or their what somebody would call their native language. And I know I have taken that for granted most of my life, to just have the Bible. Or how many Bibles is more like a better question. Do I have in paper form, much less online? So that's astounding. And speaking of Bible, in 2022, I think, the Deaf Bible app was released, and they had just finished, after 40 years, the complete Bible in American Sign Language, from Genesis all the way through Revelation, completely done in sign language. And it took them 40 years. They started way back with VHS tapes, and you can see the difference between 40 years ago and now. So that's the only language that is complete. Many countries all over the world are working on it, and they have different translations going, like British Sign Language or Japanese Sign Language, Mexican Sign Language. They have sometimes they have stories, like the story of Noah or the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. And some of them are working on actual translations. So Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, they're working on that. But the only one that is complete is the American Sign Language version. So they're still working on the other 350 to 400 different sign languages throughout the world that we know of.
Okay, so that means, so that's because American Sign Language is its own distinct actual language that you have to learn, that would be different than like in Brazil or somewhere else. Everyone
Yes.
has their own sign language.
Yes. Every country has its own. And even within America, I learned signs in Texas that are different in Oklahoma. So it's not at all universal. And just like every other spoken language evolves and new words come up, think about your middle schoolers or high schoolers and the words that they're using now. Languages evolve, so do sign languages evolve. So keeping up with that is one of the challenges that comes up. But most deaf people, everyone that I've met, is so ecstatic that somebody's even trying to speak with them and communicate with them, that it's not difficult to get your meaning across.
So, what are some of those experiences of the deaf community? What are some of the things that they're running into, living in a predominantly hearing world?
Yes, a lot of misconceptions. A lot of people think that hearing aids or cochlear implant fix or cure deafness, and actually, those are just a tool for language, or something. If they hear a loud noise, it'll get their attention so they can turn and see something's coming. It doesn't cure them, and they actually honestly don't want to be cured. They view their deafness as part of a culture. They have history. They have deaf artists that draw things. They have, believe it or not, deaf actors, deaf musicians, deaf plays, deaf poems, all sorts of things. So they don't want to be cured. So a lot of people think that a hearing aid or cochlear implant means that you can hear, or the other one is, well, just read my lips. And that's very difficult, especially if you have a mustache or if you are speaking quickly. And then if you think about it, so many words look the same on the lips. Words like who, what, where, when, why, all look exactly the same on our lips. So lip reading is a misnomer.
Wow, yeah. I know I people find it hard to understand me just on a normal day-to-day basis. I think I talk quickly, I kind of mumble. It can be very hard, especially especially with masks.
Oh, absolutely. Mask or a mustache or beard will absolutely take away from what little they can read. So the average deaf adult or someone with a college degree will only lip read about a third of the words that we say. The other two-thirds is context clues. They're filling in the blanks. A child can only lip read about 5%. So throw that child into a school or into a church without access to language, and you've lost them on so many different levels. It's very sad.
Yeah, so going back to what you said about something I didn't know is that if a hearing set of hearing parents have a deaf or hard of hearing child born,
Mhm.
they actually have access to free ASL classes.
Yes. Yes, they do. So the school systems, the public school systems, are required to offer language lessons to parents. I know they were in Texas. I'm assuming that was a national law through ADA. So that is something that schools offer to parents. Um, the problem is that a lot of when a child is born, they find out that they're hearing. If the hearing test done in the hospital fails, then they can pursue it. But a lot of times they don't find out until they're 3, 4, or 5 years old. And think about how much language they've lost learning during that time period. Not uncommon for them to start pre-K or kindergarten and then discover, oh wait, my child can't hear me,
Hmm.
which is sad, but it happens more often than I think should happen. So a lot of language is lost then, and then you add to that the fact that a lot of parents are advised by the medical field saying, no, sign language is a crutch. You don't need it. It will keep them from succeeding. It will be a handicap to them. Instead of using sign language as a tool in a huge toolbox, with all sorts of things that you can use to give the child language and access to things, they view sign language as a crutch or an obstacle to be overcome instead of giving them the deaf identity that they can have, and they don't encourage them to meet any successful deaf adults. And that is just sad because there are so many successful deaf adults with college degrees or with a good job that they're holding down, that they've learned a skill, being a welder or a plumber, an engineer. They can do anything except hear. They just need the language access. And that's where the system as a whole has failed them.
Hmm. Is there anything that faith communities could do to support that sort of early access to ASL education for new parents, like hosting a class, or is that all done through like the school system or?
The public school system should offer it. I know there are individuals out there, individual interpreters that may do that. They do at home visits. If the child is identified early, then through the public school system, they have up to age 3, I believe, they have somebody from a deaf education teacher come to the home. And they're supposed to help
Hmm.
the parents learn sign language and interact with the child to help that process go forward. So that's from birth to age 3. They have at home access through the school system. Faith communities, when they find out if someone in their community does have a child that is deaf, supporting them in whatever way that they need. Maybe more people learning sign language with the parents so that it's not just the parents that are learning sign language. That way, maybe the parents could go out on a date and have somebody watch their kid and know what the kid is saying.
Totally.
That would be very meaningful. Um, so, yeah, coming alongside the parent and spreading the news and just letting them know they're not alone and that deafness it is a thing, yes, and it is most parents have to go through a grieving process with that, which is normal because your expectations have changed. But that doesn't mean that they have to be lowered or altered. A deaf child can still go to school, can still graduate from high school, can still get married, have kids, have a family, have a job. do anything they want as long as they have a language access, and not letting them have sign language keeps them from that. And I've seen that repeatedly where families aren't supportive of the deaf community, or they think about your Thanksgiving table coming up and everybody's talking around you and you don't know what's being said, and you try to ask what's going on, and they just kind of shoo you aside and say, I'll tell you later, which they don't hear I'll tell you later, but they recognize the expression on your face. um, they're very, very left out of family gatherings. So extended family, if they could learn more sign language, that helps. And I've seen the difference in students with parents that know sign language and then extended family added to that. The success of that child is changed drastically with the supportive family. And it also has the same negative effect. So the families that don't have communication with their child, which is just sad to think of, not communicating your family traditions, your family history, your family stories, the things that we just naturally do, and the child not having that. So I've seen both sides of it, and it's sad, but it is reality.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think about, working or being around a lot of older people, how they've really seen that as older adults lose hearing capabilities, that they're not really catching conversations or what people are saying, and so it leads to kind of some withdrawal
Yeah.
and can lead to like early dementia, just because like they're not having that social engagement that's so important for just our human development and
Yes. With that
functioning.
setting, um, I'm experiencing that with my own dad right now. He has hearing aids. He doesn't like them. He's
Mhm.
not giving his brain a chance to learn how to use them. So it's a catch-22 with him. So one thing that helps is having eye contact with them, or with any deaf person, having eye contact with them, speaking not extra slowly, but I guess normal pace would be good. And then not covering your mouth like this and not turning this way, making sure you're face to face. If you're at a table, having low decorations instead of something that's beautiful but tall, but it will block your vision, that will help. And then another thing that we've used with my dad is voice to text, and that helps a lot. You can use either the texting app on an iPhone, or you can the little microphone button that you can use, or there is an app called Nagish. I think I'm saying that rightly. Nagish is the name of the app, and that is an excellent way for them to just they can have it sitting next to them, and all conversation is transcribed, so they can read it as they're going in real time, and that has been life changing for family reunions, either positive or negative. Take it however you want on those.
Yes, they're included in the fullness of life.
Oh yes, yes.
Yes. Okay. So let's say you have some in your congregation that might be a deaf family, or even just one person in a hearing family that's hard of hearing. What is a way for faith communities to sort of welcome them or make them feel included, or like what is the best way to sort of um, engage them and make sure that they feel like they're being heard and acknowledged and communicated with?
The best way would be to have them as involved as possible within the church. Having an interpreter there is the first step. Having multiple interpreters is the next step. That helps. Having videos that you may have up on a screen, having those captioned so that they can see what is being said there is very helpful to them. Um, Looking at the person and talking with them, shaking their hand just like you would another person if you meet them, and still saying hello, good morning, because they're going to be able to see from your expression they're being greeted in a friendly manner. You're reaching your hand out to shake just like you do everyone else, and they appreciate that like you wouldn't believe, because they are so used to being excluded that when you include them in any way, they feel so loved and they feel seen. And they're used to not being seen. They're used to being shoved in the corner. Um, and when you get an interpreter, having them sit up front is the best position, not in the back away from everybody else. Yes, it does take a bit for a congregation to get used to having an interpreter because it's different and it's new. But once everybody kind of settles in, then I think you'll be surprised at the positive reception. And then to see, and for the hearing congregation to realize that without an interpreter, that person does not have access to the Word of God from the pastor or from the Sunday school teacher or from the small group leader. And I know I have taken that for granted many, many times that I can hear everything that the pastor says. And he says, turn to Romans chapter 5. I can quickly turn to Romans chapter 5 and not miss a thing. Whereas a deaf person, if a pastor's just up there talking, if they don't have an interpreter, they don't know what's being said. And I know one specific couple that I'm discipling prayed for, they said 6 or 7 years, that one of the churches in Norman would have an interpreter. And I happened to meet her at one of the movies. The same Jesus movie that I spoke about earlier was shown 3 different times at one of the theaters here in Norman. And I happened to sit next to her and got to talking with her. And when she found out that I was interpreter, she told me that she and her husband had been praying for 6 or 7 years, and they had called all of the area churches asking if they had an interpreter, and they said nope, and not going to get one either. Just flat out turned down. And it's at least a 45-minute drive to the church that has a deaf pastor in northern Oklahoma City, and they really didn't want to do that. So they were looking to stay closer to home and have a church with an interpreter here. So that's the first step. The next step is including them in the membership process, whatever that looks like for your church, and then letting them be involved and serve. They can welcome people just the same as everybody else. They can welcome, kids that are coming in. They can help with the Lord's Supper. They can take up the offering. My goal down the road is to have a deaf Sunday school class that is led by one of the deaf members. So that's something that I'm talking with them about right now. My church staff is incredibly supportive and very much wants to make sure that we do this right. And they're always asking me, are we doing okay? What can we do better? How can we do this differently? Social media posts are captioned. If it's something that is a video or something, so they add captions to that. So that just automatically includes deaf people, and they see that and they appreciate that. And so basically, I would say the same thing that you would do for everyone else, but with an interpreter. And then when you have an interpreter, use that interpreter as a tool, but that interpreter is, I don't know what the right word would be. When you're speaking to a deaf person, you don't talk to the interpreter and say, please tell them I said good morning. You just look at the deaf person and you say, good morning. And then the interpreter will sign good morning. And then when the interpreter voices for the deaf person, he or she will voice as if they are that deaf person. So I would say, the response to good morning would be, good morning, how are you? So I wouldn't say, he says to tell you good morning also. So they're there, but they're not, if that makes any sense.
And what it would be the process for a faith community to find an interpreter, and what's the compensation like, or the schedule, or that kind of thing? Because I imagine it
That's
would
a
be
difficult
hard,
question.
especially if a lot of them are on a Sunday morning, at 8:30 and 11.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the struggle that I'm at right now, trying to find somebody to come alongside me. I did have someone; she had to step aside for a family emergency situation, but so most interpreters are hired through an agency. I want to say it's Serrano is the name of it. I could be wrong about that one. Um, Most of the people that I know that interpret already have a church home, and so I don't want to take anybody from their own church home. But I am working on a sub list, contacting them saying, hey, if I have an emergency and I need to be gone, can you fill in one Sunday for me? Something like that. And compensation, I'm honestly not sure about what that is. Um, I would say ask an agency or ask them what they would like to be paid. And then if I were an agency, I would set aside a small budget um, for that. So, but I honestly don't have a number for you.
So it sounds like, do you know other people who are interpreters at churches or faith communities?
No, the interpreters I know. Well, yes, I know a couple at Life Church More. So I know a couple there, um, but they're very active in their church already. And then the other interpreters I know interpret during the week in an education setting, and they have their own churches that their families attend. So their own churches don't have a deaf ministry, so they're not involved there.
Hmm. Okay. So it might be somebody to identify in the community that's already there if say they don't have a budget to hire an outside person, I guess.
Yeah. Going through an agency. The problem with an agency is an interpreter has ethical requirements. They're required to do something a certain way and be professional about it. My my thing is when I interpret for the pastor or the Sunday school teacher or whatever, um, I'm not just doing it for the deaf clients. I'm doing it to the glory of God, and I am accountable for how I do that. And so I want to make sure that I do it to the best of my ability. If I get somebody who's outside of the faith community, or I don't know them, or I don't have anybody that can vouch for them, I'm just not 100% comfortable doing that without knowing them. But that's my own personal take on that. I would want to know them and visit with them first before I would want them to interpret that in that setting.
Hmm. Well, and I think when you presented before, you said that you'll go to like the 8 o'clock service or whatever
Hmm.
to prepare for the 11 o'clock or whatever, so that you kind
Right.
of know ahead of time. Okay, what's the pastor going to talk about? What verses is he
Yes.
going to reference, or is she going to say a really uh, a name that I can't, going to have to learn
Nebuchadnezzar.
all day.
Yes, Melchizedek, yes. Or, throw in this last week, our pastor was talking about some medical conditions that people are experiencing, and there were some words, and I thought, I don't know how to spell that word. I don't even know if I can repeat that word, much less how to spell it. So I knew what it meant, so I just described it to the person. But yes, I do need to go there, and then sometimes I'll get the notes from the pastor ahead of time. They kind of give me an outline or the basic verses of what he'll be talking about. And then our worship minister emails me every Wednesday the songs. And so I can get those songs to go over because that's another whole shebang to go through worship songs. It's one of my favorite things to do, though.
Yes. Okay. So ideally, there would be an interpreter, multiple interpreters who
Hmm.
would consider it a ministry like you do.
Hmm.
Um, so the next step down, if they are unable to find that person or someone in their community, or hire somebody. Um, so you mentioned captioning, which I think makes sense. Like if they're doing, if they're streaming to social media or whatever, um, I think that's readily available. What about, I think a lot of communities now are utilizing some kind of tech like presentation, like they have like a PowerPoint with the words of the songs, or is there a way, if you're not using that, is there a way to sort of add that as a way to, because if they're, let's say you have your pastors preaching and you don't have some kind of a corresponding presentation, could you integrate something like that where it's taking what she's saying and then transcribing that onto like a screen for people to read? Is that, I think someone
The
was
only
telling me that
problem,
like Otter AI is basically doing that. Like it'll, if you like in a meeting, for example, you're setting that to record and it's using AI to transcribe that. So that is kind of an automatic thing that could maybe be used. Have you ever seen something like that done? Or
yes, I know some people that have done that, not necessarily in a church setting or a church service setting. Now, church meetings, I spoke with some people 3 weeks ago in a Zoom call, and they started out with an interpreter, and then they have moved towards transcribing. That way, if you take out the interpreter, then you have the deaf person and the other church member or the church staff member, and they have learned how to communicate with each other. The only problem with captioning is that it's captioned in English, which is great, but American Sign Language is not English. When
mm,
I'm signing, I'm taking words, putting them in a different order, and I'm not signing word for sign. It's not an equal give and take.
Mm.
For example, I am going to the store would be, that's three signs for, however many words that is. Plus, it's a different order. So, in the same way that Spanish and English are not the same, they have different syntax and different grammar. It's the same way with American Sign Language. The grammar is different. So, if you see somebody who is deaf, or if you meet somebody and they start writing and you think, boy, their grammar is bad, well, it's bad English, but they're writing the way that they would sign it. And so there's that disconnect there.
Hmm. And so even that's interesting because it's like if they're going to public schools, are they learning English there and hopefully
Depends.
ASL as well? But that's like two different languages, right? So it's like
Yeah,
they're
that
kind
depends on
of
the individual
switch.
child. So if they're in a deaf education setting, and depending on the deaf education teacher's philosophy, I have met some teachers who their philosophy is they will learn to speak and they will learn to do everything in English because it's a hearing world. While I understand that, because yes, it is a hearing world, you're also taking away their innate language ability is visual, something that they can see that is spatial versus something that is linear, where like English grammar is linear. And so you're kind of doing apples and oranges right there. Um, if you take the perspective of English as a second language, so use the language that they know that they have, which would be American Sign Language, use that to teach them English, then they are bilingual and their English skills become better, their writing skills become better, their reading and reading comprehension skills become better. Um, and that's my 2 cents. And there's some universities out there that have done projects to show that. But that's my 2 cents. But that's not every deaf education classroom's position.
So that's why it's important to have like this Bible app that has the whole, because they could just read the Bible in
Yes,
English, but it's like it's having it in the more visual native language.
yes,
That's a different
yes.
experience.
Because the Bible. I mean, we have, how many English translations are there? A dozen or more, um, and plus all of the other things that are in there. So they have hard copies of the English Bible, but because it is in English, it's like reading, it would be like me reading it in French. I know a little bit of French. I could pick up a word here and there, but how much could I really retain and how much could I apply to my life would be another story.
How about music? How is sort of music experienced?
Music is fabulous. Something that not everybody knows is deaf people can play musical instruments and play them well. Guitars, saxophones, drums. I know people who've done all of those instruments and done them well in high school. They can feel vibrations by either touching a speaker, or if on the stage or whatever, they can feel the vibrations, or they can feel it just sitting in the congregation. So they can absolutely appreciate worship music or country music or rock and roll music, any of those. With interpreting worship music, um, you make it very visual and you think about the words that you're hearing and what does it look like the song Ocean's Deep. What does it look like to have ocean waves going like this and you're walking out, on the ocean? So you make it visual and you take up a lot more space than just this. Um, and you worship that way. And by doing that, you include them into it. And what they will do as they participate in it is they will copy whatever it is that I'm signing when I'm leading worship. So they'll just copy me. And then as we get to know songs, we know, oh, this is the song, so we can do it more together. But yes, all the deaf people I know love music, love worship music and other kinds of music, and appreciate it. And um, it can be, a hearing person may look at the interpreter and say, oh, that was beautiful, and they may not know what it was being signed. But with some songs it is so visual that you can actually see, the oceans or the winds blowing or something like that, whatever the song may be, and you can see it. And if you can, depending on what kind of week I've had, I may be crying because the song has reminded me to surrender it all to God. And so he's reminded me, yes, Melanie, you need to surrender that to me too. Um, but it is worship in its truest sense. It's just visual, not auditory.
Hmm. Okay. And then covering sort of how to engage like one on one, like to make someone feel welcome. So you said turn directly towards them, eye contact, no talking louder. That's not helpful.
No, screaming at a deaf person does not help. It
Okay.
makes it worse.
But maybe enunciating a little more clearly or slowly, and then providing some context in your
Mhm.
nonverbals.
Yes, I would still keep with your same facial expressions. I don't want to say over exaggerate the speed, but make a conscious effort to not be Speedy Gonzalez either with your speech pace, and looking them in the eye and trying to not yell at them or have a conversation across the room, but be next to them, just like you would another person. Um, and that means the world to them. Recently, in a Sunday school class I was interpreting, someone had a comment that was sitting over on my right side. And the client I was interpreting for said, which person said that? Because I pointed, okay, general direction this person said. And he wanted to know which person said it. So I told him. And so after class, he said he wanted to go talk to her about something. So we went over there together. And so he spoke to her and about her comment. And then she responded back. And they had a conversation about it. And I was standing next to her, so what she did was she looked at him and she had a conversation with him, and she would say, I really like how you said this. And then he would respond back. And then I would voice for him and sign for her as if I were each of those people as far as the pronouns that I used went. But this person had taken the time over the last several months to engage with this person, with the deaf person, and say, good morning, how are you? And shake his hand. And then he would say, I'm fine, thank you. How are you? And then they would have small talk, but that small talk is building into a relationship and to conversations and discussions. And so it starts small, but just acknowledging their presence when they're used to being ignored. And most of the time when they're ignored, it's not because somebody's being rude or being mean. It's just they don't know how to talk with them or how to say something to them. So they just don't. So, and the deaf people know that. They don't take offense at that. They feel ignored and they feel unseen, but they know it's not intentional or out of meanness or cruelty. It's just ignorance is the only thing it is, which is why I love talking to groups about the deaf community so that people can learn how to talk with them and how to engage them in conversation. Even if you don't have an interpreter there, that's okay. Just acknowledging them, and you have made a best friend.
So, what are some of the apps that you had recommended, or ways to use technology to sort of help communicate?
Um,
Some.
yeah, the best apps, your notes app, where you just type out a note, and then you can pass your phone back and forth. So that works great. The other one would be voice to text in your texting app. The other one is Nagish, Nagish, and that's a complete app by itself. And that's the one that transcribes speech a little faster. But any of those voice to text or your notes app would work great. And they are not opposed to handwritten notes either. You can pass, even on a napkin, if you're sitting at a restaurant, just pass them a note saying, hey, just wanted to say hi, something like that. Any of those will work because, again, they are being seen and that means the world to them.
Hmm. Okay, so you said so you're at Wildwood
Yes.
Community Church in Norman,
Hmm.
and then are you at any other churches or just Wildwood?
Just Wildwood.
And then so you said Life Church More.
Yes,
Um,
Life Church More has, I don't know what time their service is. It has the interpreters. They have two or three interpreters that trade off doing music and the sermon as well.
and is there any kind of a resource where the deaf community could, I mean, that one couple said they'd just been calling every single church, but there's no resource to kind of find out, okay, where in Oklahoma is there an interpreter for this service at this location, or those ones where there is like a deaf pastor?
Yes, fabulous question. There is a site, it's deafchurchwhere.org, I think. But it's DEAFCHURCHWHERE. So, and it's one of the, I want to say it's .org, but if not, it's .net. Anyway, one of those. So you just type in your zip code, and you can see a map. It'll pop up, and it'll show you, for example, Wildwood will show, if you type in that zip code, it'll show Wildwood Community Church. It'll have our address. It'll have the service time where I'm interpreting, um, and it'll have a symbol that says interpreted services. And if you type in, just in the state of Oklahoma, there's a deaf church in Oklahoma City, and it'll have a different symbol and different emblem showing that is a deaf pastor there, not interpreter. And it also has place for Sunday school if that's offered at a different church. But that's a fabulous site that you can go to, and that's across the country.
Are there any online churches that like if you're living in a rural area or something like that, that you could attend an online church that provides that's all a deaf community or accessible for?
Yes, First Baptist uh, Dallas has, so you have First Baptist Dallas, which is the big church, and then a part of First Baptist Dallas is First Baptist Dallas Deaf. And so they have a deaf pastor. His name is Brandon Gaskin. And so he's there. So they're connected to First Baptist Dallas Deaf, but they also have a deaf church there. And they have their whole, I mean, it is its own church within a church there. Um, and then I think Watermark Church, also in Dallas, has a good ministry down there. I visited with a couple of people from there. Um, I don't know that their interpreters are included on the screen. Turns out that is something that's not just easily done. You can't just flip a switch. You have to have special equipment that is incredibly expensive to do that. And so
Mhm.
we are working and thinking about that, but it's just not in the foreseeable future because it is so expensive. So we're looking at different options
Hmm.
for that.
Okay. Well, anything else that you wanted to share that would be helpful that we
Um,
didn't
I
cover
think
already?
we've covered a lot. I think that's it. Basically, anytime you meet a deaf person, or if you see somebody signing out, if you're at the mall or at a restaurant or something, if you acknowledge them and just say hello, even if you write it on a napkin or a piece of paper and say, my husband did this at an airport a few weeks ago. He was at waiting for his flight to take off, and he saw a deaf man. He was talking on a phone. He was FaceTiming someone, so he was video chatting, had that going on. So Jason pulled out his notes app and typed, "Hello, I just wanted to say hi. My wife is an interpreter. Have a good day." And that was it. And just the fact that he saw that man, and that man really appreciated. So they had a short conversation back and forth on Notes app. Um, he was seen. He wasn't ignored. He was, I don't know. I just can't think of another word other than seen. But
Mhm.
the Notes app or voice to text is great, and they will be so appreciative because you have seen them, you've acknowledged that they are there, and that can be a spark that could light, who knows what for going forward.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate you spreading the awareness and spreading this word and doing the work that you do. Thank you
Well,
so
thank
much.
you. I appreciate it. I am blessed to be able to do it, and I'm happy to answer any questions that may come up.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we'll share your information.
That would be great.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.